Hey parents, have you ever asked your children, how was school today? Did they ever answer, school is dumb? Well then, this podcast is for you. Listen in as we unpack why children say school is dumb and discover what it really means. I'm your host, Shannon Hazel, also known as the Parents Educator. After 25 years of teaching and being a parent myself, I've heard every reason as to why school is dumb. So let's dive in and uncover what it really means. Welcome back to the podcast. Today's topic is executive functioning. Executive functioning is a huge topic, and today we're going to attempt to give you a general overview of the skills that fall under the umbrella of executive functioning. But like I said, it's huge, and we will definitely be breaking these skills down further for you in future episodes. So the saddest thing for me in regard to this topic is that throughout my 25 years of being an elementary school teacher, I would say that almost all students that had deficits in this area would classify themselves as not smart. Those are typically the words they would use. I'm not smart. Children do not understand the inner workings of our brains and how complicated they really are. And so when they find themselves unable to answer a question quickly in class, or get started on an assignment, or remember the instructions that the teacher just gave, at some point they translate those deficits into I'm not smart. And then they tend to carry that narrative around for the rest of their lives. So I'm happy to have on the show today Jacqueline Bissonnette, who works as a psychoeducational consultant in both the elementary and secondary school setting. I could listen to her talk about executive functioning all day. It's so interesting. And I really think that once parents and students understand that this is a thing, a legitimate thing, it can be a game changer for students both in their school lives and their home lives. So I'm super excited to welcome Jackie to the podcast.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you for being here. Super excited to have you today.
Thanks.
Are you ready to dive into this huge topic?
It is a very big topic.
It is, I know. And we did have conversations about just breaking it down from the beginning, but I think we made the right choice in going with the all-encompassing executive functioning overview.
Right.
To start. Yeah. So let's start with the big question. What is executive functioning?
What is executive functioning? So I guess the easiest way to understand it, and I always like to use analogies, is that it's basically the housekeeper of our brain. A lot of the executive functions are found, I'm putting my hand up by my forehead, in the front part of your brain. Yeah. So that's like where everything happens when you need to organize yourself, when you need to set priorities, when you need to problem solve, figure something out, manage your emotions, control your behavior. All of that is helping you manage yourself every day. So they're working hard all the day,
right,
all day long. It's kind of like the command center of your brain.
Oh, I like that term, the command center. Yeah, for sure. And so these executive functioning processes, are they something that we're kind of just born with? Are they something that we can develop over time? How do these processes work?
It's like anything in our brains, right? We're always constantly developing. And in fact, I remember reading some research not that long ago that said they have found that now those skills are developing well into our late 20s, whereas before they thought it was sort of all set by the time you're 16 kind of thing. So yeah, they're definitely constantly developing.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Would you say, though, that our brain kind of comes preset with some strengths and some deficits in our executive functioning areas, that we kind of have to figure out where our strengths and needs are, maybe in our school year, so that we can start to help build those skills and kind of compensate for our deficits?
Yep, exactly. So, I mean, there's always, different components, whether it's genetic factors or whether it's, experiences that you have during your childhood. It could be some traumatic experiences. All of those things are going to impact our brain development over time. But, also we are born with our brains, and there is no such thing as a perfect brain.
Right.
We all have things that we're good at and things that we're not so great at. So,
and I think that's my favorite conversation to have with kids, is that we're just sort of born with this brain, and then it's our job. We get to figure out, what's this brain good at? What's this brain not good at? And how do we help it? And when kids realize that it's their brain and it's the way they came, and you can take that kind of ownership off them, like they're a bad kid or they're a good kid, and they realize that it's just something they were born with. And like everyone else, you got to figure it out. Some people were born as a fast runner. They've got fast twitch muscles, and some people have slow muscles. And it's just the way your body came.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, perfect. So I guess let's dive into, so what are some things that maybe parents will notice that might be indicators that their child has a deficit in one of the executive functioning areas?
So again, like with anything, you can come up with a million examples, right? And there's always, you have to have that disclaimer that just because you see one thing that's problematic doesn't mean that you need to jump automatically to the conclusion that, my executive functionings aren't working.
Yeah.
But it's something, if you're seeing a pattern of behavior over time, that you would be, I wonder what's behind all of this, right? Like, so, for example, if they're constantly having trouble getting started on assignments and it's starting to impact, complete work and their grades, is it a matter of always overreacting emotionally to things? Maybe the reactions are out of proportion to what's happening, like laughing too hard or being too angry, things like that. Some other things are, remembering information while they're trying to do something else. For example, if they are ordering a pizza, can they remember the phone number and what they want on the pizza all at the same time? Or do they struggle with that? Right. Yeah. So it doesn't always have to be academic. A lot of these things you can even see in your daily life, right? Like, I told you 1,000,000 times you need to get your backpack and your socks. Right. You need to do this, this, and this.
I think that's a good indicator for parents too. If you're feeling like, I have to tell Susie this 17 times a day, every day.
Yes.
Then you might want to be looking at, why is that? Yeah. What's going on there? Is it something more? Because typically if our executive functioning is, firing on all cylinders the way, optimally we want it to be, we wouldn't, as parents, be doing that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Once in a while, everybody forgets things or you need reminders. But yes, when it's happening more and more often, and like you said, when you're like, why do I have to say this every day?
Right.
Or why can they never get started? Why do they always just sit there and not do their work?
Yes. And I think another piece of that executive functioning that maybe we often fail to recognize as executive functioning is that social or that emotional piece, right? I don't know how many times I've heard parents say, oh, she's just being dramatic.
Yes.
Or he cries all the time. I just ignore him. And at what point is it, 2-year-old having a little tantrum over there? And at what point is it, your child is struggling to self-regulate and to emotionally regulate, right? So like you said, there's always that fine line of, is this executive functioning or not?
Right.
Are you seeing it over time? Are other people seeing it, right? Because sometimes I know as a teacher, you call home and you tell them how wonderful their child is, and they're like, wow, that's not the kid I have at home.
Exactly.
Right? They think like, who are you talking about? So I would say that that's a good indicator too, if you're seeing it in multiple different places, like at home and at school and at sports and things like that. Because typically these executive functioning processes, if there's a deficit, kids can't just switch it off.
Exactly. Yeah, it starts to bubble over. And even if you're not seeing it academically when they're younger, typically you'll start to see it when they get to those older elementary grades, and the expectations creep up a little bit more, and that independent work creeps up a little bit more. And then, they start to struggle.
Okay. And I think that's key too, like anything, early intervention, right? So if the adults in a child's life haven't noticed it and they're in grade 2 and 4 and 6, and then by the time they get to 8, this might be a much huger problem that they're
Right.
now trying to cope with and find strategies for than if it's recognized younger
Yep.
and we're able to start trying to work on some of those strategies.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Getting them in there, getting practiced at it so that it becomes a normal habit.
Right. But I think that's the good news, is that these skills can be compensated for,
Mhm.
they can improve and grow. It really just takes an adult, whether that's a parent, a teacher, a grandparent, realizing, hey, there's something here, but we can work on it, and then diligently trying to do those strategies and figure out what works.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So with that, let's talk a little bit about some strategies that will help. So I don't know. I know working memory is a big one. Kids
Mhm.
trying to remember things, especially in school.
Yes.
Taking in that information and then doing something with it immediately without being like, oh, I forget what she said. I forget what the question asked. I forget what I'm supposed to do. So what are some strategies to help us with our working memory if we have a deficit in that area?
Well, that is also information that you can get a little bit more in depth with.
Okay.
Right? So your working memory, how much information can you hold in your mind? And is it just, am I asking you just to remember a phone number? That's like rote recall. Or am I asking you to remember a phone number and what you want on your pizza? Right? So then you've got to start manipulating the information and doing things with it. So some people are, their rote memory is okay, but then they struggle as soon as you ask them to do something with that information. And then you start to see they struggle, right? So they're going to need lots of reminders and prompts. And then the other piece is a visual memory, right? So some students might not have a strong working memory when they're listening to things, but when they see it, they can remember it a lot better. So then we have to give them visual cues, right? So write down the phone number, write down what people want on their pizza so that you can remember both things at the same time and be more efficient. Right. So it's up to kind of us as the adults to help figure out where are those strengths, where are those areas that they're struggling at, and what kind of reminders and prompts and frequent cues do they need.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times when, in my experience, I see kids struggling with this. Classrooms are very auditory.
Yeah.
Lots of instructions coming at them, lots of
Mhm.
noise around the classroom and their friend talking to them, and just that teaching environment historically has been more auditory.
Right.
And then when those kids, would come to work with me, and you start to give them the visuals, it's like it just clicked, right? Because all of a sudden we're meeting their learning need, their learning style.
Yes.
So I think our classrooms have come a long way in really having both the visuals and the auditory, and giving kids that variety.
Yep. Definitely.
So
being
that
more differentiated. Yeah.
differentiated. And I
Yeah.
think that that's something maybe as parents we don't recognize as much, because when you're at home just telling Susie to make her bed 5 times,
Mhm.
you're not thinking maybe
And
I need
yeah,
to show her what I
exactly.
want her
Put a
to
checklist
do, right?
on the wall so that you're not having to say those things every single day. You can just give that one reminder. By the way, check the checklist on the way out the door. Make sure you have everything. And sometimes, like back to that visual idea, sometimes it's a matter of helping, your son or daughter clean their room really well. And then you take a picture of it. And that's the visual reminder. This is what it looks like when it's all done. How did we get there? First we put the clothes away, then we put the toys away. And that's something that can apply across the ages, right? It can be somebody who's very young and they have lots of toys everywhere, or it can be the teenager who has clothes and food all over the bedroom.
Yes, it's reminding me of a teenager I know. And it's so funny that you say take a picture of it, because I have teenage boys, and when I say to my older son, clean your room, he'll clean his room, and then he's like standing back thinking, look at my room, and I'm looking like, have you started? But his definition of clean your room and mine are different, and I'm expecting him to know what my version is, right, when I say clean your room.
Yes.
But having that visual for some kids, and I think he would be one of them, to say, this is what your bedroom looks like clean.
Mm-hmm.
Notice how there's nothing on your dresser. Notice how there's nothing on your floor. Notice how your bed's made. Yeah. Having that visual of what's the goal here, because sometimes I think as parents we think our kids just know what we mean.
Exactly, right? You have to make it concrete for them.
You do.
And that flips right over back into the classroom, right? Okay, I want you to write an essay on, the movie that you just saw, and you tell me, what you thought of it. Was it good or bad? right? That's a very general question, right? But it's not out of the question of things that a teacher might ask. So then the student is sitting there going, "Oh, I don't know. What do you mean? If it's a good or bad? Well, I thought it was good."
Right. And right? Then
so
they
that's the end of my essay.
11 different ways to say it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, because they're not quite understanding what does an essay look like? What are the components of the essay? How do I start one? How do I finish one? Right. So that's where maybe teachers bring in anchor charts and examples and those sorts of things to help.
And that's all students. Part of that planning. That's a part of your executive functioning, right? Planning and organization is one of those executive functions that we rely on to be able to look at an essay and say, okay, these are the 5 things, success criteria that I want to include, and how am I going to do that? And for students with trouble in this area, they're just not coming by it naturally. So we have to, give them, be their outside scaffolding to help them get to that point where it's automatic.
Right. And I think that's the thing, that when we can make those habits for them through that much repetition, that's where we can build those skills, right? And now they've mastered that, and we can move on to what's the next level of it, right? We continue to build. So with that, let's move on to organization, because I know that that's a big one too, and it shows up in so many different ways in our lives. So what are some strategies for kids that struggle with organization?
Lots of templates, kind of like the same idea as the picture of the room, right? Like, what's the final expectation? Can you show me or tell me what it's going to look like when it's done, and help me come up with the steps to get there? Right. So just think of when you were teaching your very young child how to brush their teeth, right? We don't just say, hey, brush your teeth, and they know how to do it. We show them, this is how you hold a toothbrush. This is how much toothpaste you put on. You don't squeeze for 5 seconds, because then you're going to have a mess. So, taking that learning style and moving it into things that we wouldn't typically think of, such as, how to organize your desk, right? First, you're going to take everything out. Then you're going to put your pencils in one area and your paper in another area and things like that. And giving them different strategies to try. There's a lot of trial and error, right? Because it's not a one size fits all, right? There's, one student is going to like this way of tidying their desk, and another student is not going to be successful with that.
I think that's a key too, as a parent, is not to maybe always tell your children how to organize something, but say, okay, we need to put the pencils all in one spot. Where do you like your pencils? And if we're letting them have some choice there and some ownership, then they're probably more likely to remember that in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure. And it's, color coding is like, there's so many different organizational strategies. In fact, you can even watch organizational shows on TV now, right, to get ideas.
And I think for large families with lots of kids, knowing that, Johnny's stuff is all green.
Yes.
Right?
Helpful.
Helps just the family stay more organized and things to run smoother. And
I can think of students that would have their work finished. So, quite capable of doing the work, and were failing because they didn't hand anything in. It's all in the binder.
Oh my goodness. So when my son was in high school, I remember he would come home and he would open up his binder, and it would just look like it exploded every day. And I'm like, how in one day can that happen? And we'd organize it, and then it would look like that the next day. And so we started every weekend, we'd get out all his binders, and I would literally hold up, okay, what's this paper? Math. Okay, it's math. Where's the math binder? Okay, put it in at the end of all the other papers. And we painstakingly did that for many high school weekends. And then I gave him a folder so that important papers went in there. Like, you have a test I have to sign, or you have a study sheet, or you have an assignment. We kept them separate from the pile of papers.
But did it work?
Amazingly, I swear, by grade 12, I was like, oh my goodness. He could run his own ship. He knew where everything was. He knew when his due dates were. Oh, that was another one. He did have a phone, and so he would take pictures of like boards at school, like, well, here's the assignment, here's the due date, so that he just had the pictures on his phone. So, but we did a lot of work in high school, but by grade 12, I can honestly say he ran that ship himself. Awesome. He was organized. He knew, what was due when, he figured it out, right? And I think of all those weekends we spent doing those sorts of things where, like, as a parent, you're like, we're doing this again. We're organizing the red binder again. Right? But It does pay off,
Yes.
right? You have to stick to it. You have to be diligent. You have to be willing to commit to doing it over and over and over again until they're ready to take that on themselves.
Exactly. And like you said, the repetition, right? So maybe somebody else might kind of pick up on that strategy or develop themselves after a first few attempts at not getting it right. They might say, oh, I'm going to try this instead, and then it works. But students who have difficulties with executive functioning need that extra repetition, extra support to get it into that normal everyday habit mode.
And I do remember actually when he was younger, he was, I don't know, maybe 10, and we were cleaning his room, and he was just like, just take it all out. Take it all out. He didn't want a toy. He didn't want a book. He didn't want anything in his room but like the major furniture. So we had a dresser and a bed and a nightstand and a lamp and those sorts of things. And he wanted everything else gone because I think one, he was actually maybe tired of living in some of the clutter. And two, he didn't want to have to do this tidy up game anymore.
Yep,
so he just wanted it. So we cleared his room except for major furniture. And I really think that like helped him relax more. And we didn't have to talk about his messy room ever again.
Nice.
So that was good.
Easy to keep clean.
Yeah. Well, I think we have time for one more. So I'm thinking about, how about the big ones, self-regulation, right? We see a lot of dysregulated kids for a variety of reasons.
Right.
And I think maybe one of the most important life skills you can learn is to self-regulate your own emotions, your own impulses, that sort of thing. So what are some strategies to help kids of all ages? I know they look different for our younger kids than, our teenagers.
Definitely.
And our adults.
Yeah.
But what are some strategies that parents can try to encourage or help develop self-regulation skills?
Oh, there's so many. Right?
I know, right? I don't know. I'm thinking like if we can think of an example.
Well, I think if you're thinking of like a stop and think strategy, right? Like that's so many kids with executive functioning difficulties will get themselves into trouble because they like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that.
They know
what's right. They know what's wrong. But, in the moment, the impulse control goes out the window and they do it and then they're in trouble and they're like, oh, man. Right. So, how can we get that little pause into their repertoire, right? That little, wait a minute. Before you do that, just think for a second.
I think that's one of the hardest ones to build, right? Like so many children and adults just have that. They do it and then they're great kids.
Yes.
But immediately after they did it, it hits them.
Oh no.
I shouldn't have made that choice. I shouldn't have had that reaction, whatever it is. But in that moment, they just can't put in that stop.
And then they might come up with a good excuse. It wasn't me. It was it was that guy over there. I didn't actually do that.
Right. And we think like, no, you're adding line to it. But they're really not. They want to be good.
Yes.
And they want to do their best, and they knew immediately that it was the wrong choice.
Right.
And so I think that's an attempt to sort of self-preserve and say, I'm not a bad kid. It happened because of something else versus internalizing it.
Yes.
Right.
So, and it doesn't always have to be like behavior that's outward or, getting themselves into trouble. Sometimes it can even be like just trying to regulate your emotions or your level of anxiety or your level of sadness. Right. So it's hard for your brain to keep up with it and how to express it appropriately. Right. So sometimes we got to find ways to calm ourselves down, to use some calming techniques like some breathing, some stretching exercises, things like that. And again, it's always trial and error because sometimes you suggest these things and then the kids will look at you like you have three heads, like I am not doing that, right? That doesn't sit well with me. So it's definitely, you got to keep looking to try and find a strategy that fits you.
And I think that at different ages, different strategies work, right? And a strategy that may be working wonderfully for a couple of months suddenly doesn't work anymore. So I think it's really something that you keep having, the child has to reflect on, but as a parent, you have to reflect and say, okay, maybe this isn't working anymore. Right. Maybe we need to move on to something else.
Developmentally appropriate, right? Like, so if if it's a teenager, what apps on the phone can help you regulate your moods or things like that. Like there's just so much.
I think for teenagers, a big go-to one is music.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times that's misinterpreted as they're trying to like shut you out or ignore you, almost like a negative to some people. Like parents might think when they throw those headphones on, it's because they don't want to listen to them anymore. But really, I think that's, again, some self-preservation that they know that they need to just kind of block things out for a minute so they can hear their own thinking and recalibrate, and then they're ready to engage again.
Exactly.
I think that one is sometimes misunderstood in our teenagers, that it's actually a strategy that they're utilizing, which is what we want.
Yes.
You know, and it might not be the strategy we want them to use or we encourage, but it's what works for them.
And can they get that out in words, right? Like just to let you know that they're having a tough time and that's how they're going to cope with it.
Right.
Right. And it's, you know, it's behavioral, it's also cognitive, even just your ability to sort of control your attention and control your thinking, right? Staying on topic. A lot of, you know, students that struggle with that will, you know, okay, I'm going to sit down and work on this, and then 5 minutes later, I mean, we all do it. 5 minutes later, you're on your phone, right? And look at this video. It's really funny.
I don't know what you're talking about, Jackie. I always stay
kittens.
focused.
They're so cute.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
You know, it's especially now, I think we can all relate to that one, but you have to work at those things, right? And sometimes we also have to provide not only the strategies, but also some reinforcement, right? Like this is hard work for some of our kids to get these things down pat, to be able to do them like they're just a everyday habit. So like, bring out the star charts, bring out the, you know, make a note of it. That's like, you know, adding success within success. So not only are you teaching them a new strategy, but you're also teaching them to self-monitor. Like, how are you doing? Are you reaching your goal?
Yep.
Right. And it's so like, it's worth taking that extra time just to sort of track it like some way, like I said, like a star chart or something. Because then at the end of the week, you can actually see, hey, 4 out of 5 days, I remembered it all by myself and I didn't need a reminder. So that's the success thing. And it's not just your opinion at the end of the week. I think he did better or she did better, but
having something as proof there so that the child can see it too, right?
Yep.
And I think it's important to also celebrate effort, not always just the total success, right?
Absolutely,
so if
you're right.
a child's really, really trying, and maybe they didn't reach that goal, but celebrating, that was so much better. I saw how hard you were working or trying, those sorts of things. So I really think it's so kids specific, and you really have to dial into your own child and know them and know what will work and won't. Because I know some kids, you put a star chart in front of them and that's just going to deter them, because now there's all this pressure to get these stars, right?
So absolutely.
You really have to know your child and kind of know what works with them.
100%.
And I think the biggest thing too is to celebrate effort over success. Success is great, and we love to celebrate the success. And if they get there, that's awesome. But also acknowledging the efforts along the way.
Yeah, definitely. It's I can think of students that have had, you know, lots of great capabilities and then just get so down on themselves because, like you said, they think, oh, I'm not smart enough, or I just can't do this. Or they get, you know, they hear the words that they're lazy and they're not trying, but it's so many other things that are underneath it that we really have to make sure we look at it all. And
I think that's maybe one of the most popular things I will hear parents say about their child is, she's lazy, he's lazy. And I think if you're finding you want to label your child as lazy, you probably want to flip that around and look at their executive function.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Because that's usually what's behind it. They're not actually
lazy.
Yeah. And that's hard. And when kids hear those sorts of things enough, they start to think that there's, you know, something wrong with them, and they internalize that. Yeah. And really, kids with executive functioning deficits can be stellar students and stellar academically, right? And go far. It's just a matter of figuring out those strategies that work for them so they can do their best learning.
And they can still have lazy days, but that doesn't mean they're lazy.
Exactly. Okay, so I guess my final question to you is, if parents are listening right now and they're thinking some of this sounds like their child, what would be the next steps? What would you recommend?
I would think that definitely looking into an assessment would be helpful. Right? Because if you have a psychological assessment completed for your child, then you really find out where their strengths and weaknesses are. They're going to delve into those areas to look at what parts of the brain is working well and what parts need some supports in place. So, you know, definitely whether it's talking to your school, finding out if you have that access through school, through community services, or there's private practitioners in most communities to to help you get that. It's definitely good information to have about your own child.
And I know as an educator, like that's golden, right? When as teachers, we get that document that says, here's a child's profile through a psychological assessment. It gives us so much fantastic information as educators, but also as parents, right? You start to see your child as like in a whole new way.
Right.
Once you have that information and you realize, you start to play back all the things you've said to your child in your head, like saying you're lazy, and you start to think of that so differently. And then it allows you, I think, to parent from a different place.
Exactly. Especially when you can see them doing things so well. It's like, well, you can spell just fine. You can read just fine. Why is this so hard for you to get this assignment done?
Yep.
And they don't understand it. But it's, if back to those analogies, right? If you think of like an orchestra is like, if you have all of the instruments playing in their little groups, like the drums sound fine, the clarinets sound fine, the trumpets sound fine. But when you play the song all together, something's not quite right. Right. So that those executive functionings are like the conductor that keep everybody in check, and so the song sounds right.
I love that analogy. That's a good one. I'm going to remember that. All right. Well, like I said, this is a huge topic, and I'm hoping to over time dive into each of these individually. But thank you so much for being on the podcast and giving us that
for having me.
Overview. Again, I love this topic, and I think that you and I could probably talk about it forever. But hopefully parents at home, have gotten a little snapshot and at least enough information that they might start thinking about their own child in a different way and thinking, maybe this is something, I should explore further. So
definitely. There's lots of great resources out there.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Lovely having you. Hopefully you'll be back soon. If you're a parent looking for more tools, strategies, or resources to support your child's learning, please visit my website, theparentseducator.com, or follow me at The Parents Educator on all social media platforms. Thanks for listening to the podcast, School is Dumb. More episodes can be found on your favorite streaming platform. Thanks for tuning in. Till next time.